Let me tell you about the most satisfying 30 days of my life, and how a simple Ring doorbell brought down the most insufferable HOA president in suburban history. My name is David, and I thought I was moving into a quiet neighborhood in Maplewood Estates. What I actually moved into was Karen Morrison's personal kingdom, where she ruled with an iron fist and a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws. Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind of woman who measured your grass with a ruler, took photos of your garbage cans if they were visible from the street for more than 6 hours after pickup, and somehow always managed to be patrolling the neighborhood at exactly the wrong moment. She had been HOA president for 8 consecutive years, running unopposed because, frankly, nobody else wanted to deal with her level of micromanagement. The first time I met Karen, I was unloading groceries from my car when this woman in a crisp white polo shirt and khaki shorts marched up my driveway like she owned the place. Well, technically, according to her interpretation of HOA rules, she kind of did. She had perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move, even in strong wind, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Good afternoon. You must be the new resident in Unit 47. I'm Karen Morrison, your HOA president. I wanted to personally welcome you and ensure you understand our community standards. I noticed your moving truck blocked the fire lane for approximately 14 minutes yesterday, which is a violation of Section 12.3 of our community guidelines." I stood there holding a bag of groceries, trying to process that this woman had apparently been timing my movers. "I appreciate you stopping by, Karen. I'll make sure to review the guidelines." But that wasn't enough for Karen. Oh no, she was just getting started. "I also need to inform you that your outdoor light fixture appears to be a warm white LED rather than the approved daylight white specified in our architectural standards. You'll need to replace that within 14 days to avoid a fine." She pulled out an actual clipboard and made a note. A clipboard for a light bulb. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Karen had elevated petty tyranny to an art form. She issued citations for garden hoses left visible, mailbox numbers that were supposedly the wrong font, and trash cans that were allegedly 6 inches too close to the street. She had a network of neighborhood informants who would report violations, though I suspected most of her intelligence came from her daily patrol walks with her tiny, yapping chihuahua named Princess. The breaking point came when Karen decided my newly installed garden was a threat to community aesthetics. I had spent 3 weekends creating a beautiful herb and vegetable garden in my backyard, staying well within the approved plant list and height restrictions. But Karen had other ideas. She appeared at my back gate one morning, clipboard in hand, while I was watering my tomatoes. "Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid we have a significant problem. Your garden exceeds the approved square footage for residential growing areas by approximately 6 square feet. Additionally, your tomato stakes are creating an unsightly visual barrier that violates our sight line ordinances." I measured that garden 3 times before planting. I followed every ridiculous rule in their 40-page landscaping addendum. But Karen had somehow found a way to reinterpret the regulations to target me specifically. When I politely disagreed and offered to show her my measurements, her face turned an impressive shade of red. "Mr. Thompson, I don't think you understand how serious this is. As HOA president, I have the authority to fine you up to $500 per day until this violation is corrected. I'm trying to be reasonable here, but your attitude suggests you don't respect our community standards." The way she said, "our community standards," made it sound like I had personally insulted her grandmother. That's when I realized I needed to document everything. Karen's harassment was escalating, and I had a feeling things were about to get much worse. So I did what any reasonable person in 2025 would do. I installed a Ring doorbell. 2 of them, actually. One facing the front of my property, and one with a clear view of my backyard gate, where Karen liked to conduct her surprise inspections. The installation took about 30 minutes, and the cameras were practically invisible unless you knew where to look. I made sure they were positioned on my property, facing areas where I had every legal right to record. I even checked the state privacy laws to make sure I was completely in the clear. Karen, however, noticed them immediately. The next morning, she was back with Princess and her clipboard, but this time she brought backup her husband Gerald, a meek man who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and Sandra Walsh, the HOA treasurer who shared Karen's enthusiasm for finding violations where none existed. "Mr. Thompson, These surveillance devices are completely unacceptable. They violate our privacy ordinances and create an unwelcoming atmosphere in our family-friendly community. I'm ordering you to remove them immediately or face substantial fines. Karen pointed at my doorbell like it was some kind of weapon of mass destruction. Actually, Karen, I've reviewed the HOA bylaws pretty thoroughly, and there's nothing prohibiting security cameras on private property. These are standard doorbells, and they're only recording areas I have a legal right to monitor. I kept my voice calm and professional, which seemed to irritate her even more. Don't you quote bylaws to me, young man. I've been enforcing these rules for 8 years, and I know exactly what's permitted in this community. She was getting that red-faced look again, and poor Gerald was studying his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. What Karen didn't realize was that her little outburst was being recorded in crystal-clear high definition, with perfect audio. Over the next 2 weeks, my Ring doorbells captured a masterclass in HOA abuse of power that would make any lawyer salivate. There was the morning Karen tried to enter my backyard without permission to inspect my herb garden, only to find the gate locked. The camera caught her actually trying to climb over the fence before giving up and taking photos from the sidewalk. Then there was the afternoon she convinced the neighborhood kids to retrieve a frisbee from my yard so she could claim I was refusing access for recreational activities. My personal favorite was when Karen brought a tape measure to prove my garden was oversized, only to discover she had been measuring incorrectly for weeks. The camera captured her trying to stretch the tape measure to get the result she wanted, muttering under her breath about technicalities and uncooperative residents. But the real gold mine was Karen's interactions with other neighbors. The doorbell microphone picked up her conversations with Sandra about problem residents and their plans to make examples of people who challenge their authority. They discussed strategies for creating violations, timing fines for maximum impact, and even joked about making certain neighbors' lives so miserable they would be forced to move. The most damning evidence came during what Karen clearly thought was a private conversation with her husband. They were standing near my fence, and she was explaining her latest scheme to charge me for excessive water usage because my garden required daily watering during the heat wave we were experiencing. Gerald, I'm telling you, we need to make an example of this Thompson character. If we let him get away with challenging our authority, every resident in this community will think they can ignore the rules. I've been looking into his background, and I think we can find other violations if we're creative enough. The camera caught every word in perfect clarity. Gerald's response was even more interesting. Karen, honey, maybe we should just let this one go. The man's garden is actually quite nice, and technically he hasn't broken any real rules. But Karen wasn't having any of that reasonable nonsense. Gerald Morrison, I am the president of this HOA, and I decide what constitutes a violation. If you can't support me in maintaining community standards, then maybe you shouldn't be serving as secretary. Poor Gerald just nodded and went back to looking at his shoes. After 2 weeks of collecting evidence, I had over 40 hours of footage showing Karen's harassment, attempted trespassing, abuse of power, and what any reasonable person would consider stalking behavior. But I wanted to give her one more chance to back down before I played my trump card. I requested a formal hearing with the HOA board, which consisted of Karen, Gerald, Sandra, and 2 other neighbors who rarely spoke up during meetings. The hearing was held in the community center, and Karen clearly expected to railroad me with her prepared list of violations and demands for compliance. Mr. Thompson, you've requested this hearing to address what you call harassment, but I think we all know what this is really about. You moved into our community and immediately began disrespecting our established standards. Your refusal to comply with reasonable requests has created unnecessary conflict, and frankly, your attitude is disruptive to our neighborhood harmony. Karen had obviously rehearsed this speech, and she delivered it with the confidence of someone who had never faced real opposition. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board, and I think you're absolutely right that the evidence will speak for itself. I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector they used for community presentations. I'd like to show everyone exactly what's been happening over the past few weeks. The first video I played showed Karen trying to climb my fence to access my backyard without permission. The room went completely silent as they watched their HOA president attempting what was clearly trespassing. Karen's face turned white, then red, then a sort of purple color I'd never seen on a human being before. This is taken completely out of context. I was simply trying to verify compliance with landscaping regulations. But her protest was cut short by the second video, which showed her coaching neighborhood children to enter my property without permission. By the third video, where Karen and Sandra discussed their plans to make examples of problem residents, Gerald was shaking his head and Sandra was staring at the floor. The fourth video, featuring Karen's admission that she was looking into my background to find creative violations, caused one of the previously silent board members to actually gasp. But the final video was the piece de resistance. It was Karen's conversation with Gerald about making my life miserable to force me to move, combined with her admission that she decides what constitutes a violation regardless of the actual rules. When that video ended, the room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. "Karen, I think we need to discuss this situation privately." Gerald's voice was barely above a whisper, and for the first time since I'd met him, he actually looked his wife in the eye. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. "This is clearly a setup. Mr. Thompson has been recording private conversations without consent, which is probably illegal. I demand we contact the police immediately and have him arrested for invasion of privacy." She was grasping at straws, and everyone in the room knew it. "Actually, Karen, I checked the state laws pretty carefully before installing the cameras. In our state, there's no expectation of privacy in areas visible from public spaces, and all of these recordings were made from my own property, capturing activities that occurred in plain view or within normal hearing range. But I appreciate your suggestion about contacting the police." I pulled out my phone with a slight smile. I actually did contact them yesterday. That's when Detective Maria Rodriguez walked into the community center, followed by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as an attorney from the district attorney's office. Karen's eyes went wide as she realized that this wasn't just an HOA hearing anymore. "Miss Morrison, I'm Detective Rodriguez with the county sheriff's office. We've reviewed the evidence provided by Mr. Thompson, and we have some questions about your conduct as HOA president. Specifically, we're investigating potential charges of harassment, stalking, and abuse of authority under the state's HOA regulation statute." The detective's voice was professional but firm. The attorney stepped forward with a folder full of documents. "Additionally, Miss Morrison, the state attorney general's office has received multiple complaints about this HOA's practices. The evidence provided by Mr. Thompson has prompted a formal investigation into potential violations of residents' rights under state law. We're prepared to file charges that could result in significant fines and removal from your position." Karen's face went through about 6 different colors as she realized the full scope of what was happening. Her petty power trip had attracted the attention of law enforcement and state officials, and there was no talking her way out of 40 hours of recorded evidence. "This is ridiculous. I've been protecting property values and maintaining community standards for 8 years. Everything I've done has been within my authority as HOA president." But her voice lacked its usual confidence, and her hands were shaking as she clutched her clipboard. The attorney opened her folder and pulled out an official-looking document. "Miss Morrison, based on the evidence we've reviewed, the state is prepared to file formal charges against you personally and against this HOA as an organization. The charges include harassment, stalking, violation of residents' privacy rights, and abuse of authority. The potential fines total $47,000, and conviction would result in your immediate removal from the HOA board and a prohibition against serving in any HOA leadership position in the future." The room was so quiet you could hear Karen's shallow breathing as the full weight of her situation hit her. $47,000 in fines, criminal charges, and the end of her 8-year reign of terror over Maplewood Estates. Her clipboard fell from her hands and clattered onto the floor, and for the first time since I'd met her, Karen Morrison was completely speechless.